This may turn out to be my most choppy, rambling review ever, but I can't not talk about it. 2014 saw the 15th anniversary of Digimon Adventure, the very first season. To celebrate, a 3-part movie was made, still being made as I don't believe Part 3 has aired yet, with a new storyline but bringing back the original characters. This was 2 years ago, some of you might be saying. Why are you so excited about it now? Well, last night, September 15th, if I don't get this up today, was a special one-night premiere of the English dub. I feel like I've stated this over and over in various reviews, but I'll briefly explain again why this is a big deal to me. I typically only watch a show in one language. Even if it's a language I don't speak, I get attached to the characters' voices, and then it can be distracting to try and watch it any other way. I watched Digimon in English, flaws and all. It was my very first anime. So yes, I was super excited to hear about this project a few years ago, but as more and more time passed and I continued to hear nothing about a concrete English dub, it kind of fell off my radar. Until about a week ago, that is, when, by some sort of extreme luck, I happened upon a link to the tickets. I will actually have plenty to say about the voice acting in this one, as only about half the original cast came back to reprise their roles. But first, let's jump into the story. Well, first, let me warn you for spoilers. I'm sure this movie is old news for a lot of you by this point, but I've only seen it once as of last night. There are still things I'm trying to figure out myself, so I plan to share quite a lot. So, my opening point actually has a bit of conflict in it. Where Digimon Try takes place in the greater story. I believe these movies are meant to take place 3 years after 02, and this might raise some red flags for fans like myself who watched the dubs of the original series. I believe in the original Japanese only 2 or 3 years were supposed to have passed between seasons 1 and 2. I definitely remember the time skip in the dub being something more like 4 years. 3 years on from that would put our heroes out of high school, which doesn't seem to be the case. Here's what I'm pretty confident about. Joe seems to be in his first year of college, or perhaps some sort of in-between year because they keep talking about entrance exams. Tai, Matt, and Sora are seniors in high school. Izzy and Mimi are also in high school, a year or 2 behind. And Kari and TK may still be in middle school? By my calculations, they should be in their first year of high school, but they wear different uniforms than the older kids, and they never interact with the older Digidestined in a school setting, so I'm still not entirely sure about that. Anyway, time has passed, but the Digidestined don't seem to have drifted terribly far apart. They're just going on with their lives in the real world, until once again, electrical disturbances start popping up all over the city. This culminates in Kuwagamon breaking through the barrier between their worlds and doing a ton of damage. Tai does what Tai does best and uses himself as bait to lure the rampaging monster away from the city. And then the moment we were all waiting for. Just as Tai is cornered and confronting his own powerlessness, Agumon appears to save the day. We get an awesome scene where we get to see Agumon digivolve again for the first time in this new animation style, and the 2 Digimon's fight keeps breaking through the barrier between worlds, so that one minute they're wrecking Japan and the next they're in the digital world. We actually get to see them destroy what looks to be the cliff the Digidestined fell from in the very first episode. The entire scene just made my heart sing. Tai and Greymon prevail, of course, but with the ominous message that Kuwagamon seemed a lot stronger this time around. We get our full reunion when 3 more Kuwagamon converge on an airport and all the original Digidestined and their partners come back together to defend the city. Well, almost all of them. To be honest, I was so caught up in the moment that it took me a second to realize, wait a minute, where's Joe? Gomamon actually has to leave the fight to go find his partner, but that's something I'm going to wait to address until we get to the character discussion. Anyway, there's something a little interesting about how they all got to the airport. It turns out one of Ty's teachers, who's animated to look strangely young, is actually an undercover government agent. His organization is monitoring what they call infected Digimon. And I don't feel terribly uncomfortable telling you that I don't fully understand this yet, because the movie ended with a preview for movie 3, and the characters still seem to be figuring it out themselves 2 movies down the road. At any rate, the infected Digimon are apparently strong enough to break through the barrier into the real world. Based on Kuwagamon, I would hazard a guess that the infection works a little like the Black Gears, drives a Digimon crazy and just compels them to destroy everything. But the next Digimon we meet, this movie's final villain, seems very present mentally and very mission-oriented. Which brings us to the last plot point of this first movie. Enter Mako, a transfer student who, predictably, turns out to have her own Digimon and Digivice. I find it interesting that she has one of the older models, but that's something for the continuity section of this review. Anyway, Alphamon, who is clearly designed to look like a dark Omnimon, is targeting her. Or rather, Mekumon, her Digimon. They clearly have some sort of connection to the infected Digimon, but that's not something that's revealed in Reunion. All in all, I am reserving judgment on Mako. For reasons that I'll explain in the character section, I swear I am trying to keep this thing organized, Matt actually has to convince Ty to fight, but once he does, they have another awesome friendship moment, we see the return of Omnimon, and the threat is vanquished. For now, anyway. Thankfully, we're not left on much of a cliffhanger, but it's obvious there's more to come. So, the characters are all familiar faces, but I do want to discuss their portrayals, at least briefly. Well, some more than others. Mimi seems to have grown up a little, Izzy and Sora were pretty much the same. Kari I'll discuss in the voice acting segment, so that leaves us with half the team. TK's portrayal made me laugh the most, but not in a bad way or a way that seemed out of character. All the darkness from 02 is gone, and he's just grown up to be a very cool, relaxed teenager. And then there's Joe, who's clearly got his focus on becoming an adult. Joe's few appearances in this movie gave me the impression that he's kind of grown out of being a Digidestined, which is sad, but in keeping with his character at least. One of my favorite scenes in 02 is when all the older characters come together to discuss the new Digidestined. Joe is the first to accept that their time has passed. I suspect Joe's story will be a point of conflict later on, but for now that leaves us with Matt and Ty. In many ways, Ty is very much the same, but he's grown up a lot too, and he's really shaken by all the damage Kuwagamon causes early on. It makes him reluctant to fight later battles. On the flip side, Matt is more gung-ho about fighting than he's ever been. The argument could be made that this is out of character, but I didn't really feel that way. Matt and Ty have always bounced off of each other like that. When Ty was the one rushing ahead without a second thought, Matt was the voice of slow down, someone could get hurt. Now it's Matt's job to be the voice of, yes, fighting could get someone hurt, but doing nothing guarantees total destruction. If anything, it was a step back for Ty, who kind of already had this character arc in the show when he was finally able to activate the Crest of Courage, but it wasn't a terrible thing to focus on. I can live with Ty just needing a refresher, and now he's got 2 movies to move on from that point. And so we come to my review of the dub. I mentioned that about half of the original cast came back. I could have cried hearing Joshua Seth as Ty again, because he hasn't been a voice actor for years, but he came back for perhaps the most pivotal role of my childhood, and he sounded like he never left. Maybe I'm being a little dramatic, but that could have made the entire experience worth it. Mona Marshall also sounded great as Izzy. Those 2 were probably the most true to character. We also got the original voices for Sora and Mimi back. Mimi just sounded a little older, not as squeaky, which was a welcome change, And Sora... There was something about this performance that was not quite the Sora I remembered, but given how much time has passed, it was just nice to hear a familiar voice in the role. And now we move on to the new voices taking over for the other characters. Robbie Daymond is the new voice of Joe, and I'm starting with him because I don't really have an opinion on him. I mean, he obviously wasn't bad, so there's that, but to be honest, Joe didn't really get enough screen time for me to judge his new voice. TK threw me for a loop at first, because his original voice actor is in the movie as a different character. Maybe he couldn't do the voice anymore, or maybe Doug Erholtz just wanted to play the shady teacher instead, but in any case, Johnny Young Bosch took over for TK and Vic Mignogna took over for Matt. I mention them together because if I personally could have made any changes, I probably would have switched their roles. I feel like it would have just been a little more in keeping with what they originally sounded like, but I can understand if whoever was in charge of casting purposefully stayed away from that and didn't want these new performances to sound like imitations of the old ones. Like I said, I have trouble dislodging voices from my mind. There may always be a little red flag that pops up, signaling something's wrong whenever I hear their voices attached to these characters, but from an objective standpoint, they both did a good job. Which leaves us with Kari. Kari has always been a character who's never had much personality, and the voice performance for a character like that can be crucial. Tara Jane brought an edge to Kari that I didn't feel had any business being there. She was just a little too sharp or intense sometimes. Yeah, Kari got a little sassier come 02, but she always had this light, almost too perfect air about her, and this performance lost that. She didn't sound terrible, but this was the only new portrayal that I felt was truly out of character at times. But as a whole, this was a good dub, and I'm sure it's hard to take over for characters who already have fan followings. So, to wrap up this review, let's discuss continuity, shall we? Going into this, I was really curious as to what they were going to do with 02's existence. This is supposed to take place 3 years later, so it can be assumed that all of those events are canon, and I wouldn't have blamed the writers if they just wanted to pretend Season 2 never happened. But there are certain things that don't add up. For one, 02 ends with every person in the world getting their own Digimon partner. Clearly that didn't happen, and the gate to the digital world is closed for some reason too, because it's established that our heroes haven't seen their partners in a long time. On the other hand, the world is now clearly aware of the existence of Digimon, which wasn't totally clear after Adventure, even if it should have been. And the big concern with that was if people knew, they'd try to get into the digital world themselves and basically fuck it up. There's no mention of that happening, but the organization Tai's teacher is a part of has been in contact with Genai. Side note, in this dub, they pronounce it Genai, which, yeah, made me cringe a little. Here's all I have to say on the subject. It is very possible that it was the original dub that messed up the pronunciation. It wouldn't even surprise me, but I have been pronouncing it Genai for more than a decade, and that's how I'm going to continue to pronounce it. Anyway, the movie does open with a scene showing shadows of the 02 characters falling into evil-looking Data. I think it's safe to assume something happened to them, and I'm totally fine with making those characters a part of the story. I'm also totally fine with wanting to keep this first movie focused on the original 8 Digidestined. What bothers me is that the 02 characters aren't mentioned once throughout the entire movie. If we are working under the knowledge that, well, most of the events of 02 are canon, even if something is keeping those characters away, shouldn't the older Digidestined, or at the very least TK and Kari, expect the younger kids to be a part of this? I know there are still 2 movies left to address this, but the fact that it doesn't come up at all was a little fishy to me. But this is the point where I would break off into predictions for the next movie, and this has gone on long enough. I did really enjoy this movie, and it's made me really excited for the next 2. Getting to relive my childhood in theaters with vastly improved animation and music was just beautiful. This is really the kind of movie I can only recommend to people who are already fans of Digimon. I actually kind of liked that it didn't include a recap of any sort. But the first 2 movies are on Crunchyroll, though I can't speak for the dub, and if you're a Digimon fan who hasn't seen it yet, I highly suggest you do. Thank you for watching.